All right, Phoebe, thank you. The Wisconsin Health Department starting to prepare for a potential loss when it comes to funding for Medicaid here. This comes after the U.S. House proposed $880 billion in cuts to the federal budget. Wisconsin's Medicaid director says after reviewing everyone in the Medicaid program, if the budget cuts go through, the state would lose between $6.5 and almost $17 billion. He says, though, there are 4 things that Wisconsin would have to do to keep Medicaid. That would either be finding more money from the state, changing who is eligible, covering fewer costs, and cutting provider rates.
Lots of uncertainty at the federal level, and I know both Republicans and Democrats in the legislature are sort of we're all trying to read the tea leaves about what will or won't happen at the federal level. And
Now, he said the department's main goal right now is getting Governor Tony Evers' budget passed to provide more funding to Medicaid.